Greetings gamers, welcome back to another video, and today we're going to learn how to play Deathnote, the trading card game. This game was made by Konami back then in 2008. It only had 4 sets that came out before it ended. A little bit about this game. So this game was only restricted to Japan. This never got released in America, which I'm very upset because Deathnote was pretty popular in America, so I'm surprised this didn't get released in America. But we are going to be going over this rule book right here. So it is only in Japanese, so the translations were pretty weird. So I'm gonna do my best to translate how to play this game. Other than that, let's talk about the game. So Deathnote is a 2-player game where you lead characters who act as your subordinates using actions such as investigation or Death Note to try to uncover the truth, which is you earning victory points before your opponent. And your victory point section is going to be right there. So the game objective is the first player to earn 13 victory points wins by performing actions, using events, or discarding the opponent's characters in the character file. So your character file is going to be this right here. At any point in time, if you're required to draw a card from your deck and there are no cards left, regardless of how many victory points you have, you lose the game. All right, so now that you guys know the objective of the game, what we're going to be going over is what all you need to play this game. So you need a 40 card deck, and you can have a max of 4 copies of the same card. You're going to need a character file, which will be this right here. And then you're going to need a holographic card, which will be this right here. We'll go over what those do later. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the cards itself. All right, so going over the character card right here, where my thumb is, that number is the cost to play this card. So that cost means you have to spend that amount of victory points in order for you to play this card. So if you have 0 victory points, you won't be able to play this light. This red text right here, so that is your actions. So with this game, characters can perform actions, and that is what the red text right there is for. The next text that's in black is what your character has for special abilities. So that's pretty much all there is for the card. Obviously, this left side right here is the name, and then like the subtype for this right here. So this is Light Yagami, and that right there just says Yagami family. I translated that, by the way. Moving on to the next card. So this right here is an event card. So with the event cards, you see the number right there that shows how many victory points you have to pay to play this. And with event cards, they just do certain things like it help you draw cards or look through your deck for something. This next card that we're looking at is a special card. So these cards get played on top of your character cards, which grant them special abilities. So the red text right there is the actions that the character gets, and then the black text are special abilities that this character gets. So it adds on to what your character already has. So with special cards, they're pretty unique because you can only have 1 copy of them in play of that card, and then whatever the name of the card is, that's the only character it can attach to. The exceptions are Shinigamis like Ryuk and Rim, which in the text it states it could be put on any character. But with special cards, you'll have, like, for example, Light or Misa. Those can only be attached to those characters and no one else. All right, so you guys know all the cards in this game, so we're going to talk about what you need to do to prepare for a game. All right, to begin this game, you shuffle your deck and you determine who goes first by playing rock, paper, scissors, or rolling dice. Once you determine who goes first, you draw 6 cards. So we'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then, sorry, this looks a little messy. This playmat I'm not a fan of. It's just everywhere right now. All right, we just need it flattened up. So I'm probably just gonna put this here maybe, so we can just help flatten it up. And then I'll put it down here so you can see a little bit more of the field. So now that you drew cards, what you're gonna do is look at your hand and you get one mulligan. Mulligan is shuffle back into your deck and then you redraw. Once you do that, you'll just place your marker that's right here to 0 on the VP tracker, and then you're ready to go. So like I said before, the victory condition is at the end of turn, if you have 13 or more victory points, you win. And how you lose as well is if you draw cards from your deck and you can't draw a card. That's how you lose. All right, so next we're gonna go over the turn phase of this game. So with this turn phase, you have 5 main phases, and then you got like sub phases, which will be 2 of them. So the first sub phase is the start of turn. So some abilities that you have at this time will trigger. So a main thing is the Deathnote action, which we'll go over what the Deathnote action is. That starts and happens during the start of your turn. And what you do is you just reveal the character file and you discard a designated character on your opponent's field. We'll just go through all that once we talk about it. But that's what happens during the start of turn. So after the start of turn, you go into the point phase. So at this phase, if your victory points are less than or equal to your opponent's victory points, you gain 1 victory point. So this is really good. It helps keep it balanced, this gameplay, because you're going to be playing cards that cost VP. And so at any point when you get pretty low, it helps balance out to where you just automatically gain victory points if your opponent is equal to or has more. So it helps to be able to keep playing cards. So after that phase, you move on to your draw phase. So draw phase is you just draw the top card of your deck. The first turn player that goes first skips this phase. The next phase, which will be phase 3, is the recovery phase. And that's when you change all your characters from acted to not acted. And that's the direct translation that it had from the Japanese text. So acted means you did an action, and that's just you tapping the character. And then a not acted character is a character that's just upright like this. So the next phase is the action phase. So this is where a lot of the action happens. Hence why it's called the action phase. So with the action phase, there's 4 things that you can do. So you can perform an action with the character on the field. So action is just the red abilities that you see on your characters. So you could do one of those. Another thing you could do is you can play an event card. And then the event card, this is one right here. It just says event. So you could play that. Also, I want to make note that your opponent can also play event cards during your turn. All they have to do is meet the requirements and play it when it says when you could play it. Another thing that you can do during this phase is change the character from face down to face up. So just like this, you're playing this and you could turn them face up. So there's a reason why you can do this, which we'll cover that later in the tutorial of how to play. And then also want to let you know that your opponent can also change their characters from face down to face up. The next thing you could do is change a special card that you have to face down to face up. Okay, so when you first play a special card, you can only play it face down, and then once it turns into your action phase, you can turn it face up. So that is all you can do during the action phase. So next we'll move to the phase 5, which is the character phase. So with the character phases, you could do the following things. So you can play a character from your hand as an acted face up character, and just playing a card, it just costs the cost right here. So cards that you see with 0, obviously that means it costs 0 victory points for you to play them. What you can also do is you could change a face up character to face down. So if you have them up right here, you can just turn them face down. Well, actually that's an event card. But this right here, you can turn them face up to face down. And so just want to let you know that action during the character phase, turning them face down, you can only do that once per turn. And you'll see why you can only do that once per turn, because if you're able to like do it as many times as you want, then it'll make this next phase that we go over later in the game pretty much impossible to do or to succeed. Another action you could do is you could discard a character or special from your field, And then what else you can do is place a special from your hand onto a character on your field as a face down special card. So you could only have up to one special card per character. So you can't just give a character all these specials to make that character super broken. So that's a good way to limit broken things from happening. So once all those phases are done, that's when you move to the end of turn. And then there's some triggers that happen during end of turn, but once all those triggers are done, then it moves to your opponent's turn to do those steps. Okay. So now that we went over all the phases, just pretty much gave you like a brief synopsis of it, we're just gonna dive a little bit deeper into each phase so you could truly understand how to play this game. So with the point phase, like I said earlier, the turn player, if your VP is less or equal to your opponent, you gain 1 VP. Also, just want to note that the non-turn player can't do anything this phase. Next is the draw phase. That's when you draw a card. First player obviously skips this. Also want to mention that the non-turn player can't do anything during that phase either. Next, you move to the recovery phase. And so recovery phase is just you turn your active characters into not active. Also, just want to let you know, if you're the non-turn player, you can't react during that phase either. Also do want to mention that if your character is face down like this, that character cannot perform any actions. They have to be face up in order to perform an action. All right, next we're going to dive deep into the action phase. So with the action phase, first, the first turn of both players, it's you skip this turn, so you can't play, you don't get an action phase during your first turn if you're the first player or the person going second. Once it becomes your second turn, then you can do things like this. So during your turn, the turn player can perform the following 2 actions during the action phase until you pretty much you can't play anything else. So the first action you could do during the action phase is perform an action with the character on the field. That's just you stating you're doing one of the actions, which will be the red text right here. And then you obviously turn them from not active to active to perform that. Another thing you could do is you can play an event from your hand. While you're performing one action, you cannot perform another action. So pretty much what that's saying is, if you perform an action with this character, you can't just like respond by playing like another action by a character or playing an event card. Each action has to go off one by itself. And then, like I said, you can perform any of these actions as many times as you can. I do want to make a note that the non-turn player, they can perform the following 2 responses whenever you perform an action. So when you're the turn player and you declare an action, that's you just stating that you're doing an action by one of these characters, the red text, then what the opponent can do is they can play an event from their hand to respond to that action. Also want to make a note that when you're the turn player and you make an action, in response, your opponent can designate an action to respond to your character on the field. So a good example is this. So you can investigate. So the cards state whether they investigate or something else that they do. So investigating is just you gaining 1 point. If your opponent has a card that blocks investigate, that's how they respond to that. So let's say he has I forgot actually what the term is. I'm going through the rules later. We'll go over that later. But there's a term that blocks investigate. And so when you investigate, if this character has that term to block investigate, then he'll respond by blocking it. And so that prevents your opponent from gaining a victory point because it's being blocked. Now, I do want to mention this. If you are the turn player and you do nothing, your opponent can't do anything either. So that's a big thing. So your opponent can't respond if you're not doing anything. But other than that, both players can perform the following actions anytime. So what they can do is they can change their character on the field from face up to face down. They could change a special card from face down to face up. And this can be done at any time. even when an action or event is being processed. So I do want to mention this. So the action phase is the most important phase in this game, because that's when you're going to be conducting investigations. You're going to be doing an action called shooting and etc. to increase your victory points. So it is imperative that you do as much as you can during the action phase. Now, once the action phase is done, that's when you move into the character phase, and we'll break this down even deeper. So during the character phase, the turn player can freely perform the following 4 actions until they stop performing any of these actions. So the first thing that they can do is they can play a character from their hand as a not active face-up character, and you can only do that once per turn. Now, I do want to mention, when you enter the character phase, what you're going to do is you're going to compare the number of characters on each player's field. If your opponent has more characters in play, then you can play up to 2 more during the character phase. So that's the only way that you can play more characters, if your opponent has more characters on the field than you do. So it just helps balance the game out. But if your opponent doesn't have more characters than you, then playing a character is going to be only once per turn. The other action you can do is you can change one of your characters on the field from face up to face down. That is only once per turn. And then another action, the third one, is you can discard any character special cards you control from your field. And then the last action you can do is you can place a special card from your hand onto one of your characters on the field as a face down special card. And that's a maximum of 1 special card per character. So now a quick example about this is, we're going to talk about how to present your character like you playing a character. So the first step is you're going to declare your character that you're playing. So you're going to choose a character from your hand and you're going to declare that you're playing it. So after that, you'll move to the next phase of that, is by cost consumption, which will mean you just spend the victory points equal to the cost of the character in play. And the final part is the character placement. You just place a character in an empty slot on your field as a not active face up character. So as you see right here, you got 6 slots, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You can only max out of having 6 characters in play. So that's pretty much it for the character phase. So now we're going to deep dive and talk about special cards, which will be this Ryuk right here. So special cards can be placed on top of characters to add actions and special abilities. Just want to let you know, like I said previously, these add extra action and special abilities based on what it says right here. So when playing special cards, the following rules apply. When you're stacking, putting the special card on top of the character, you always do it like the reverse special method. So that just means that you're just putting it on bottom. Well, really it's on bottom or top, but it's technically saying you just put it like right here so you're able to see all the text. So next thing I want to mention is that you can only attach a special card to characters with the same name. However, if the text states it can be layered on anyone, it can be attached regardless of the name. And like I said, Shinigamis like Ryuk and Rim can be attached to any character. If the special on the field is hidden, you cannot add special actions or special abilities to a character that's stacked on top of it. That's pretty much self-explanatory. So if you can't see it, then you can't do the text. It's just like a face down trap card or spell card in Yu-Gi-Oh! When it's face down, you can't use the effects. Another thing is, even if the special card is face up on the field, if the character stacked on top of it's face down, the stacked character cannot be given a special ability, action, or special ability. So if he's like this, the character can't get these texts because he's a face down character. And then also, last but not least, with the special cards, if the character is ever returned to the hand or discarded, the special card goes with it. So remember when I was telling you that you could play cards face down? You can turn characters face down. So this is why, based on this next action. So this is going to be a special action. That's going to be the Deathnote action. So the Deathnote action is exclusive to special cards. And it's a unique action that allows you to discard an opponent's character by using the character file, which will be this right here. So pretty much with the Death Note action, it differs from other actions. So I'll explain it in a little bit more detail. So we'll break down the Death Note action. So the first part of the Death Note action is the Death Note. So you perform the Death Note action and you specify the character you want to discard in the character file using the holographic card. I also want to mention, guys, be sure not to show your opponent what page you're on, because they'll be able to try to put that card face down to prevent a death. So the next phase of the Death Note action is the Death Note release. So that happens at the start of turn. So you remember when I was telling you that you have start of turn effects? So this is one of the effects. So at the start of turn, after performing the Death Note action, you reveal the name you specified to your opponent. And then once that happens, you move to step 3 of the Death Note action, which is you discard the character. If your opponent has a character with the specified name face up on the field, then you discard the character. So Death Note actions can only be played once per turn, and you may choose a character that is not on your opponent's field. So if you want to try to kill somebody that you think your opponent's gonna play on their next turn, then that's when you'll pretty much do something like that. And then even if the character or special that performed the Death Note leaves the field after the action, but before the Death Note start of turn phase, then that still discards the character if it matches in the Death Note and your opponent's character's face up. So picture it just pretty much like, let's say, I'm trying to give the lore of it. So Light Yagami writes Ray Pember's name in the Death Note, and let's say Light Yagami dies. Well, Ray Pember's still gonna die because his name was written in the notebook. So that's pretty much what that means. And then last but not least, if the character you selected is not on the field, then nothing happens. So that's where coming into play, putting the card face down happens. So what you're gonna do is, let's say L's on your opponent's field. So you're gonna go through your character file, and then you're gonna find L. If I can find L. Sorry guys. Okay, L. So you see L. So what you do is, when you use a Death Note action, you're going to get the Kira card, and you're going to put it, the face where you see that red eye has to face the character that you're trying to kill. So if you're trying to kill this guy right here, the Death Note eye goes right there. So we're trying to kill L, so we put the Death Note card right here, and then we close it. So that is when you perform the Death Note action. And then at the start of your turn, you reveal to your opponent who you wanted to kill. So it goes like this, and this kills L. L gets discarded. Now, if L's not on the field, L doesn't die. So at any point in time, if your opponent's thinking, oh, you're going to try to kill L by this action, he could turn L face down. And at the start of your turn, your next turn, if you reveal this and L's face down, L doesn't die because he's technically not on the field when you perform this. So that's why you have that face down action that you can do, but that's only once per turn. All right, so that's pretty much the game, guys. We went over the phases. Now I want to tell you about the actual actions that you can do. So the actions are just going to be the red card, the red text right here. Each character typically has a red action. Actions are what help you gain victory points and things like that. Now, there could be a character that doesn't have a red action, and what that pretty much means is they can't do an action. That's really all that means. So we'll go over each action. So the first action we're going to go over is the investigation related actions. So that's only turn player who can perform these actions. So these actions don't directly affect the opponent, but they take a good lead on the subordinates and guide the organization to victory. So the first investigation related action is investigation. So you just gain victory points. So if your character has that key term investigation, then they can perform that action. And you just tap them or consider them acted, and they gain victory points based on the number that's on them. So right here, it wouldn't make sense for this guy to have investigate, because if he were to investigate, he's only going to investigate for 0. The next investigation related action that you can do is I have an idea. So a character will have that stated on one of their actions, and what that means is you gain victory points, and also you draw X amount of cards from the top of your deck. The next action a character could have is surveillance, and what that is you perform the same action as one of your face-up characters with the investigation type action other than surveillance. So you can't stack a surveillance with another surveillance, but what you can do is you can do all the other surveillance actions or all the other investigation actions with surveillance. So surveillance just gives somebody an investigation action. The last investigation action is meeting. So Watari, he typically has this action, and so what meeting is you could add X amount of cards from your discard pile to your hand. So it helps you gain cards back from the grave. So those are all the actions that you can do based on the investigation related action. I do want to mention that only the turn player can perform that action. So if it's your opponent's turn, if one of your characters has one of those investigation type actions, you can't perform those on your opponent's turn. You only have to do it if it's your turn. All right, so the next type of action that a character could have are attack actions. So again, this is only the turn player who can perform this action. And this action allows you to take action that directly affects your opponent. So the first action that a person can have for the attack action is threat. And so a threat is you gain victory points, or you discard X cards randomly from your opponent's hand. So with these, it's either or. There are some actions that you can do both, but whenever you see or, you can only choose one or the other. The next action for the attack action that a character could have is shooting. So what shooting is, you gain VP, and then also you choose X amount of face-up characters on your opponent's field and you return to hand. So it states how many it is. It could say 1, it could say 2. It all depends on the card. All right, so those are the only 2 currently in set 1 for the attack actions. Next, we're going to move to the Deathnote type actions. And again, this is only the turn player who can perform this. So this action uses the character file, which we demonstrated previously. And that just helps you discard a character on your opponent's field. And again, you just select the character from the Deathnote file. And at the start of turn, you reveal the selected name to your opponent, and you discard any face-up character on your opponent's field with the same name. So the next action we're going to be talking about is the defense actions. So the defense action can only be played if you're the non-turn player. And what this action does is it helps neutralize your opponent's investigation action. So with this, you have the key term on your character card. They could have the key term defense. And so pretty much defense is you disable the opponent's investigation action. So if you have a character that has defense and your opponent tries to investigate to gain a victory point, that is when you could tap your or turn your character to act it, which is tap, if they have the defense ability on their card. Now, I do want to mention with this, characters could get discarded with this. So if your opponent who investigates has a higher power value than you, then your character is discarded. If it's equal or lower, then nothing happens. The opponent's character that did the investigate doesn't discard or anything like that. It's just nothing happens. Now, that is for the defense for investigation actions. Now, you do have a defense ability for attack actions, and so that's called the blocking effects. And again, this can only be performed by the non-turn player. And so what this action does, it negates an opponent's offensive action. So this can nullify shooting and things like that. And that term is called dismissal. And again, that nullifies the opponent's offensive actions. But yeah, other than that, guys, that's pretty much it for this tutorial. The game seems pretty unique. I kind of like the mechanics based on me reading it. I'm sorry if it's some of the jargon on here, the text seemed kind of weird. It's just some of it was kind of like broken English. I had to try to interpret and type up whenever I made it, because there are some like non-direct translations in Japanese to English, so it was kind of weird. So I just had to make do with what I had. But other than that, guys, thanks again for watching. I hope this video was useful for you guys. But other than that, we'll see you in the next video. Peace.